A few weeks ago, I watched this video called I'm Tired of Reading Fantasy Books and realized that I was feeling the same thing.
Fantasy has become a little exhausting to me. I'm a little tired of it. And not in a bad way.
He discussed his recent experience branching out and discovering the strengths of the genres that he just had not been reading. And he discussed it was kind of nice to take a break from what had been his favorite genre. It's a really good video, and I will definitely link it down below. One thing I'll say about this creator is he seems to show subtle but authentic emotions in a way that I think is really hard to replicate, and I appreciate his videos for that. I think for the last while, fantasy has really been the gateway back into adult reading. We see a lot of creators promote really good fantasy series and talk about their love through reading, but through that lens very specifically. And after a while, sometimes it feels like everyone is reading the same 10 series and everyone is reading the same 10 books. And when you start kind of reading that way, it can get tiring for you. And this isn't just the case with fantasy. We'll get to comments from people who just feel like this from other genres in general once they kind of get to the point where they're reading the same thing over and over again. But we can say that this is definitely a very common thing for someone who got back into reading as an adult with fantasy and getting burnt out after reading book 7 in a series. A couple comments on his video were, I totally agree with you about most fantasy books leading into series. It stresses me out to think about starting a new series when I haven't finished the other 4 I've started. And I'm relieved that you shared this with us because I have also struggled to manage all that is required with the fantasy genre, but I haven't had the courage to admit it. Sorry, Brian, for highlighting your comment in an actual video, and hopefully that you have the courage now. Otherwise, whoops, sorry. The third one that I want to show from his video was this. It's wild how one's preference can change. When I was younger, I lived and thrived off fantasy and romance. But as an adult, I kind of got burned out with, well, exactly what you aptly put. In the video, he talked a little bit about how he was feeling. And now after nearly 10-year reading slump, I'm falling in love with reading all over again, but with different genres. Mainly, I'm delving into horror, thriller, and the classics mixed with other subgenres of fiction. Happy reading, everyone. I feel this too. Even though I'm relatively young still, my reading tastes have changed with time. When I was a teenager, I honestly read a lot of classics and a lot of historical fiction, in addition to the most popular series of the time, which was like The Hunger Games. As a very, very new and young adult, I was reading a lot of nonfiction. And then when I was introduced to the bookish side of the internet, specifically Booktube in my case, just like a lot of people, I started getting into the really, really long, never-ending fantasy series. Some people think having sort of this shared love of the same books is actually a good thing. Here is Nick Reed's Fantasy kind of making this pitch.
It's essentially a piece of shared culture among us, something that's increasingly disappearing in a world that's becoming more and more virtual and more divisive. Like, this little piece of shared culture we have can create a sense of belonging.
I think his opinion is valid. I do think that there are probably positives to having a shared culture and having certain books that everyone can kind of point to bring up certain, I don't know, discussions that multiple people can actually have an opinion on. It can be really hard to do that with books when people aren't reading similar books. Now, to be fair, like, I feel like I'm kind of doing that on my channel where you don't have to have read any of the books I've read for us to talk. But in general, it's going to be harder to start those community-forming discussions if no one reads the same thing ever. That being said, I found another perspective of this like online space from one of my subscribers. I went on his channel because he commented and talked about his channel and watched his Booktube newbie tag. And part of it was actually really interesting. He kind of talked about the genre silo problem of Booktube. I'll let him talk for a second.
But there are book silos or genre silos on Booktube where the fantasy and sci-fi people are in one corner and the lit fic or literature fiction people are in a complete opposite corner. And I don't get it.
I do think that this perspective is definitely valid too. It feels like once people brand their channels as a specific genre, they sort of stay in their lane, and they talk to other people who have done similar sorts of channels. And to some extent that makes sense, because those are the people who obviously have a lot in common with you. But it's not crazy that he felt that there's multiple sides to the online reading space, and that there's not that many channels that try to show you both. So in a community post, I asked you all about this. I asked you not just about fantasy, even though that's kind of what started this video for me, but I said, do you ever feel burnt out by your favorite genre? And what do you do about that? Do you branch out? Do you make sure that you have more of a variety in your reading? And then I also sort of added in like the internet side of things. First, let's go ahead and talk about some comments that I got on my post just about people's reading and their preferences for how they choose books, especially when it comes to genres, or avoiding maybe pigeonholing yourself in one category unless you want to. That's kind of a lot, but let's just go through the comments and I'll kind of talk about what I think of each comment. One commenter said, one of my favorite elements of branching out started with the idea of burnout. After reading several books from the same author back to back, the concepts, prose, and patterns started to grate on me and create undue negativity on the experience. Adding a random or a planned palate cleanser is a great way for me to enjoy more time in the hobby, while also letting the curiosity of what's next start brewing, building excitement to go back to those stories that leave a mark on me. I really agree with this comment. I feel like if I read the same author or same series back to back to back, I start to feel like it's a chore. And I don't know, I know some people can do it and really enjoy it, and there's exceptions. Sometimes you get so obsessed with a series, for lack of a better term, that you just want to read it all at once, but sometimes you're just burning yourself out by making yourself read 7 books in a row from the same person. I'm a completionist by nature. I like to actually finish projects that I start. So when I start something, I take it very seriously, even if sometimes I shouldn't. So in my early 20s, I would oftentimes start a fantasy series, because fantasy is so popular, and then finish the entire thing at once. For example, I read all of the Witcher books in a row, which is literally crazy. It was really healthy for me to step back and realize I didn't need that completionist attitude when it came to book series. I could just read them over time so that I actually enjoyed them. I personally wish I had seen this comment, which says, a series or a genre can be like your favorite snack. If you eat it all day, every day, then eventually you might forget why you love it. I think that can definitely be true. If you never take a break from what you love, you might feel overwhelmed and forget that you liked it in the first place. Some readers emphasize trying different things to understand their reading taste better. One comment said, when I got into reading, I intentionally tried several genres to see what I liked. Being a male in his mid-20s, romance is about as far from my genre as possible, but I've read 2 romance books just to try them out. They may not be my go-to, but the experience was worth it. I'd recommend anyone try any genre at least once. I think his approach to just trying things just to try them is definitely refreshing. I have been surprised before by genres that I did not think I was going to like, or authors that I did not think I was going to like, actually being some of my new favorites. So there's something to trying something that you really, really don't think you'll like, and maybe you will, and if you don't, you don't. That's fine too, but you never know. Another commenter said, my general advice to people would be to try books outside of their typical genres. You'll never know if you will like something until you try it. However, if you try different genres and decide that you really do prefer a certain genre, that's totally fine as well. It's not about forcing yourself to do something. It's about making sure you're not limiting yourself. 100% agree. I think people should try new things, but if you try something and you don't like it, be honest about it. If you leave reviews, leave an honest review. Don't try to fit into a community by forcing yourself to like something that you generally don't like. I think that we don't have enough time in our lives for reading to choose to read things that we're not having fun with. There needs to be some benefit out of your reading session. If you're not feeling you're getting it, don't do something just to do it. Another commenter pointed out that for him, it's really not about genre. He said, I have the genres that I enjoy, but it's the stories that call to me most. I think genre is a good launching point for wanting to read, but you have to know what kind of stories you want to consume, which will lead you to many different books within different genres. I really agree with this. I think that genres can be a good place to get yourself into reading because at first it could be a little overwhelming to figure out what you actually want to read, and having those categories and distinctions can get you involved. But once you've read a lot, you'll realize that your favorite books that speak to your personal reading taste aren't necessarily sitting right next to each other on the same shelf in the same part of the bookstore. You will realize that there's certain threads between the books that you like that kind of are more categorized by you and your own taste and what you like. And you'll learn that you will like multiple genres. Now, some people really do just like one genre, and that's okay. But I would say for the vast majority of people, there's going to be something else that connects the books that you love the most. And one last comment on this part before we get into a slightly different part of this video. He said, I started branching out after getting into French Canadian literature. Opened my horizons quite a bit. I got burned out of fantasy recently after reading a couple bad books, so I went ahead and opened some Quebec authors, and that sent me down a rabbit hole of literature. What I think is interesting about this comment in particular is he mentions reading a couple bad books. Sometimes you can kind of be burned by a trope or a genre or a certain type of book, and there's been times in my life that when I know I like that genre and I get burned by a couple bad books in a row, I'll just continue reading the genre, and it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth for the next books I try, even if the new books aren't bad. Sometimes the best approach, at least for me, and maybe for this guy too, is to just completely disconnect for a minute from a certain type of book and go in a completely different direction and have something that feels fresh again, and maybe eventually, once you've had enough of whatever you're trying, you go back. Let's cover one more topic in this video. In addition to this discussion of burnout, a couple commenters went towards the discussion of YouTube in general and the social media effect on this whole discussion. A reader that commented said, I subscribe to YouTubers who read and promote a large range of books, and I look out for what sounds good, regardless of genre. I suppose if you only follow one or two, you might get pigeonholed into one genre, but there's a plethora of YouTubers to choose from. I think she's definitely right. If you are getting your recommendations from social media or from YouTube, you can follow more than one person, and like I said in a previous video, you don't have to read every book that's ever recommended to you. In fact, that is probably the bad approach. You can pick and choose a couple that one person reads that you think sounds good, and then pick and choose from another creator. So one day you might be watching someone who loves classics and really promotes classic literature, and you choose a book from their list. The next day you might be watching someone who is a huge science fiction fan and pick a book from their list. If you are following more than one person and diversifying where you're getting your recommendations, if you're getting it from YouTube in the first place, you can get recommendations from more than one person and then never pigeonhole yourself into any genre. Another commenter went at this same discussion, but from the content creator perspective. He said, I became a booktuber largely thanks to the fantasy genre, and it's still my favorite by far. That said, I do think balance is important. I try to mix in science fiction and historical fiction alongside my fantasy reads, even though the YouTube algorithm definitely seems to box creators into a single genre lane. From what I've seen though, if a fantasy-focused channel suddenly posts a romance or a mystery thriller review, the algorithm usually doesn't push it since viewers often aren't seeking that type of content from that fantasy channel. So while I love branching out, there's always that tension between reading widely and staying within the lane that both your audience and the algorithm expect. He's right. I have noticed that the YouTube algorithm, in conjunction with just other social media spaces with short form content, seems to want to put you in a box and in a lane. If you start your channel posting fantasy content, you are a fantasy channel. And some people specifically brand themselves that way, and they want to be that, and that's good. But it does make it to where you can't really do other things once you have decided to make that specific channel. Some people love that, and it isn't a problem. If you do start it that way, though, you do kind of have to stick to it forever. I mean, you can totally pivot. I'm being a little bit dramatic, but it is sort of how YouTube works. Once it identifies your audience and who is interested in your content, it's going to push it to the same people. And if they don't like the things you're posting, it's not going to get the same reach or the same amount of views. And that only really matters if you care about views and growing your channel. But let's be honest, a lot of people do. I mean, I do. I don't think I'm just like a narcissist trying to get a huge following or anything, but I like talking to people, and more views usually means more comments and more discussion, and I'm a big fan of that. I think this setup where you kind of have to stick to one thing for the sake of the internet can sometimes get a little tiring, even for the most dedicated creators. I mentioned on this channel before that I saw a Daniel Green video where he was trying to broaden the scope of his channel.
And so for henceforth now on, I'm planning on labeling this channel a speculative fiction space. We are no longer constrained by the terms science fiction or fantasy.
I'm totally speculating here, but I'm not sure he was actually able to broaden it to the amount that he wanted to, just because I think that YouTube works a certain way. And I don't think I've seen him really post a bunch of historical fiction content, for example, even though, I mean, I don't obsessively watch him, so maybe I'm wrong. And I'm not saying that we should feel bad for a guy who likes what he does and has a big following, but I definitely think that once you have a clear brand and you're a person posting on the internet, you sort of have to stick to it. And all that I'm saying is if creators, because of what they create, and readers, because of what they see every day on the internet, feel like they're having this situation where they're reading more of the same thing now than they would have in the past, that might be partially just an internet thing. As like me specifically, as like an individual, I try to sidestep that whole genre divide thing by creating a Booktube channel that wasn't about a genre. I kind of do discussions and video essays in the book space, and I think that's been working for me. So I think if you do want to read widely and also post on the internet, there's definitely an approach to do that. There is a way that you could definitely come up with. But because of how the internet works, it almost does expect you to have something that's consistent from video to video, and that can be really hard to do. If you have an opinion on online reading communities or on genre burnout or on the creator side of this, go ahead and post anything you can think of down in the comments. This is really more of a video where I'm trying to have a discussion, and I hope that we can continue it. I don't have like really strong opinions on this that I'm trying to prove. I'm just trying to get people to talk. Thank you for watching.